Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Amphibian Press podcast. Today, I'm talking with author M.A. Clarke Scott about her books, which all sound very interesting. They're women's fiction.
That's
And
right.
why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. Well, I started my career in writing later in life after a couple of other professions, but it's something that was always there on the bucket list. I've always been an avid reader, always wanted to write, and so about 15 years ago, turned my attention to this. So I'm not, I didn't study creative writing or English. I'm self-taught. Absorbed most of what I know through reading and practice and networking with other writers and workshops and conferences and that sort of thing, and practice. Lots of practice.
Yeah, that's a big
So,
one.
yeah. And I wrote for a long time, many years before I finally decided to take the indie publishing route. So my first book came out in 2016. I have 3 books out now, and my 4th is scheduled later in April this spring. So hopefully that goes according to plan. It's basically finished. I have to do a few revisions based on some editorial input, but it's very close to being ready to go. So yeah, I don't have the cover with me. It's really beautiful. I showed it off, I think, on my social media streams a while back, so it's out there. Yeah.
Awesome. So we'll put links to all your social media and stuff in the bottom,
Sure.
and so people can go check out the cover.
Okay.
Um, so tell us a bit about your books, because you said that they're a series, but they're not really connected. And
Yeah, I'm calling it, I call it the Life is a Journey series because it's a series of books, not with interconnected characters or storyline, but in terms of the premise, which is that they're youngish, 20-something North American women who are abroad for some reason. They're either traveling or they're studying abroad or they're on some sort of mission in a different country. And I think I started it with The Art of Enchantment, which is the one book that is out already. Just because I travel a lot. I love traveling, and when I'm traveling, I'm often relaxed and inspired by the different settings, the different cultures, architecture, which was my former profession, and art history. And that just gets the juices flowing and the wheels turning. And so stories start popping into my head and characters, walk onto the page. And The Art of Enchantment was born when we were traveling in Tuscany. And I've always been a big fan of Sting. And he has a villa somewhere in, not Tuscany, the next province over. And I was sort of thinking about all these beautiful Renaissance villas that dot the landscape, but are like manor houses in England, old and crumbling and very expensive to maintain. And I was thinking about the fact that somebody with deep pockets has to come along and rescue them. And that's where I came up with this idea of a villa in Tuscany that the original family, who might have been sort of faded aristocracy, were on the verge of losing because they just didn't have the finances, and how a wealthy American celebrity of some description, and in this case, it's a rapper. So he's looking for a nice crib in Tuscany for his family to hang out at, and he's shopping around, but he has other plans for it, and so the story centers around an art history PhD student who's a Canadian American young woman who's been traveling abroad and living abroad, and trying to finish her PhD and please her parents and just kind of get by. She's a little bit under her rigid academic parents' thumb, and she, through a bit of a mishap at the beginning of the book, meets this handsome Italian hero who is part of this family that's going to lose the villa. But because of her passion for art history, Renaissance art history and architecture, she's studying in Florence. She's desperate to help him save this villa so that the family doesn't have to sell it. And so the story ensues, and that's where the love story comes up between these two characters. Uh, and so that indulges me in my interest in culture and history and architecture and art and travel, and also the opportunity to write about young women who are kind of at a turning point in their lives, where it's not a young adult coming of age story, but it's kind of like a new adult um, uh, discovering their own identity and their own course in life, and kind of making some important choices. And I've always found, and this is true for my other series, my Having It All series, that uh, love and romance and intimacy is an interesting catalyst for self-learning and self-discovery. So a lot of people who write women's fiction don't necessarily have a romantic arc within it. I do. I pretty much always do so far anyway. And I think that's because I like romance as a genre, but I can never seem to contain myself to just traditional genre romance stories. They always get more complicated. The arc of the heroine and sometimes the hero too are a little more complex, a little deeper, and crosses over into women's fiction. So I call it rule-breaking romance, but it's really romantic women's fiction that rides that line between the two genres. And sometimes that's problematic because it's hard to figure out how to package it, in terms of covers and blurbs and the categories. When you're indie published, you have to make all these decisions yourself and try to make sure that my stories connect with the kind of readers that would appreciate them, because it isn't traditional romance and it isn't women's fiction the way some people write women's fiction, which is maybe more family saga, sisters, mothers, daughters, that sort of thing, or women dealing with divorce or other sorts of family tragedies. So anyway, so the Life is a Journey series are all these younger women who are somewhere, as I said, Tuscany in that case, and A Forged Affair, the one that's coming out in April, is set in the south of France, in the province of Aquitaine, and in a little town, a beau village, a beautiful walled town there. And it's about a Canadian woman who's she's on a vacation that she was forced to take from her rather high risk rope access and search and rescue positions. And she's very athletic and physical. She does parkour, and so she's sort of jumping and bopping and risk taking her way across the south of France, and ends up in this little village in the midst of a medieval festival, which is an annual event that occurs there. And these sorts of specifics are things that are inspired by my actual travel. My family stayed in that part of France, I guess in 8.5, 9 years ago, and stumbled on this amazing festival. And I just, again, it inspired me, and I thought, what a wonderful setting for a story. And then you start to pull the pieces together and figure out, well, who would be here and why would they be here and who would they meet and what sorts of situations would they become embroiled in. So that series is, as I say, about characters who are out of their normal milieu and encounter strangers and get involved in their problems in some fashion, try to help somebody, try to solve a problem, meet somebody new, and fall in love, but then are forced to kind of reevaluate their own lives and their own path and figure out where they fit in, where they belong. So my character in A Forged Affair is Nikki Ballantyne, and she meets two men in this village. One is a fellow Canadian who is a French immersion teacher who spends every summer there with his friends. He's almost grown up there. And the other is a local blacksmith who's a virtual giant. He's 7'4"-ish. And he has some issues dealing with his size, and he has a massive crush on a local seamstress that's been going on for since grade school practically, but he can't seem to make moves on her because he's so shy and awkward about his size. But he's actually a very intelligent, very sophisticated man. He's just kind of trapped in this gigantic body. And so she decides he reminds her of her younger brother who had some special needs, and is the part of her past that she's kind of perpetually running from. So she decides she's going to help this giant. His name's Didier Legrand, and in the process gets to know the Canadian teacher, and the three of them end up in this kind of love triangle that's rather complicated and risque and fun.
I'll say fun.
I think it's fun. It's interesting because I get to bring in some unusual characters. There's an old woman that sells produce in the market who's always making cryptic predictions and warnings and stuff to the main characters, and they don't know what she's talking about, but the reader might pick up a hint of what she's trying to tell them in her sort of mysterious ways. So yeah, so it's a fun book to write, and I think that's the neat thing about having a new fresh setting, is you can bring in different aspects of the history, the architecture, and different sorts of lifestyles and professions and things that occur in those specific places. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
What would you say your favorite part of writing is? Did you hear me?
Nope, you glitched out completely.
I'm like, oh no, I thought we were going to disconnect and then we didn't. What would you say your favorite part of writing is?
Oh, I think it's the conceptual stage. I love story structure and story planning and coming up with characters and figuring out the who and the why, and what motivates them to do things and get them into trouble. So it's kind of like a puzzle. You have these bits and pieces. Like I say, when I'm traveling, I have inspiration that comes from different things, but then there's a bunch of gaps that you have to fill in, and you use your knowledge of story and character to fill those gaps. So I like to put my characters, once I know who they are and what their backstory, their problem is, the hole in their soul, and throw in their path obstacles or opportunities or love interests in particular that are going to kind of make things as difficult as possible for them, and challenge them and force them to deal with their past issues, to deal with their identity issues, and so that they have a growth experience. And I think that's what's interesting for the reader, is watching that character transform, watch them suffer and learn and come out at the end better than before. So the story planning stage is like a puzzle, and I think I'm most stimulated by that. That's creative. But the writing itself, the first draft, is, most of it's fun. Some of it's not fun. Some of it's hard. I often get to about 60-70% of the story, which is coming up to the dark moment and the climax of the story, and just seize up. So for years I'd write about that much of a story, and then I'd set it aside because there'd be some other shiny new object to chase, and then coming back to it would be really difficult, because then I'd have to kind of find my way back into the story emotionally and psychologically, in order to reinvest in it and get through that difficult stage. I'm trying not to do that anymore, because it's easier to push through the first time than to come back to it after you've gone off and done something completely different for a while. So that's the hard part for me. Revision has never been my favorite part, but it's something that I am enjoying more and more as I mature as a writer. I think I have more tools in the toolbox, more clarity around how to approach that part of the writing exercise. And I think that's where, the story is really clarified and refined. And so I'm appreciating that more and more with each successive manuscript. But I think for me, the most fun is the inventing part of it. At the moment, I'm at the very early stages of sketching out a whole new series, unconnected to either of my other two series, which will be set in some fictional Canadian coastal city and involve a group of friends, you know, millennials, sort of younger, similar to my Life is a Journey series, 20-somethings, who are reunited after 10 years away from when they grew up together and graduated from high school. So it's kind of that point in life again where you've gone off, you've gone to university, or maybe you've got married and started a family. Things may have worked out for you, or maybe they haven't, and you're starting over. And these characters are all coming together and either continuing or renewing their friendships, but then moving on to the next stage of their life. So all these other characters come in one at a time, and the series it will be written so that each of them have their own arc and their own relationship, their own romance, but all the other characters are recurrent. And so there's some storylines that will thread through the entire series, which I've never done before. So that's a whole other level of puzzling and problem solving that I'm finding quite stimulating. So we'll see where that goes. That's the plan anyway.
It sounds good.
Sounds
exciting.
Yeah.
I like
so
those.
My other series. Sorry?
I was just saying I like those kind of stories.
Yeah, when they're interconnected. I think that allows readers too to get to know characters a little more and get invested in that fictional world and kind of want to come back and find out what's happening. Mm-hmm. One after the other, and you can kind of drop teasers in too, about those different characters and what their issues might be, and build up to it a bit. So we will see how that goes. See if my brain explodes. So my other series is an actual series, but again, they're mostly standalone stories, but the characters do reoccur, do cross-populate, and I have 2 books out in that series, Reconcilable Differences and Disruption by Design. And the third one is written, I'm at that 60-70% point, but it's going well. So that'll be out, I'm hoping, in the fall of 2019. That one, the third one's called Backyard Heartache. And they're maybe a little bit darker. The characters are a bit more mature. They're 30-something professionals. And the theme that I guess runs through all of those books are more mature women who have been struggling with choices. So as modern women do, they want education and career and personal fulfillment, but they also still want relationships. They want romance, they want family, they want to belong somewhere. And often those choices are overwhelming and exhausting. And every woman is making choices along the way that make sense for them, but sometimes feeling that they can't handle it all, or they've left something behind. So these stories enter the woman's life at a point where something is disrupting the continuum and making her question the choices that she's made in the past. Reconcilable Differences was my first book, and it's about a woman who reconnects with her former big crush, a brief love affair that she had in college, and everything went sideways for her. And when he re-enters her life, she has to take another hard look at some of the painful experiences that she's had, and where she's stalled, where she made choices that were maybe not in her best interest in the long term. So they're a little bit darker. There's a little bit more soul searching, and the protagonists are a bit more mature. So, but there's still romance in them, definitely. Yeah.
Do you have any books with like married couples who are married from the beginning?
Not yet. No, I don't know why. I just seem to I seem to be drawn to that moment when someone new comes into your life and sort of throws a curveball, I know a lot of women's fiction is about married couples who are like either breaking up, so that again, that's the inciting incident for a new chapter in their lives, or there's something that is challenging the marriage and forcing them to reevaluate or to work at it, take it to a new level. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, every author, I guess, has their, we all have our thing that we keep revisiting, keep coming back to. And so far, no, I don't know. Well, I'm still figuring that one out in my own life, I guess. Marriage is a lifelong project. And I don't know. It's just not the stories that I'm curious to explore so far.
I just wondered, because the 30-something, I wondered if you had something in the works.
Yeah, no. I think about it, but those ideas are not popping into my head, so I don't know. Not sure.
Was there anything else you wanted to cover?
I'm just thinking about the two series. No, I mean, I can tell you about Disruption by Design. I'm running a promo on that right now, but it'll be over by the time this comes out. But I do run promos from time to time, and the best way to hear about them actually is to be a subscriber to my list, and that's something you can find on my website. And I actually have another, I don't know if it's a novella or a shorter novel. I haven't done a word count recently, but I just am finishing that novel, and it's a little bit more romance than women's fiction, but trying to be a little bit lighter with it. And it's called Single Dad in Studio 7D, and it's going to be available exclusively to my list subscribers. So for the foreseeable future, it won't be available for sale. But all the subscribers on my list will get that one for free, and it's a fun story. It's kind of a girl next door, boy next door story, where a young woman borrows the studio of a friend, and for a short period of time, like 3 months, while her friend goes off to an ashram in India or something. She's teaching yoga classes she's got a bit of a leave of absence from her university research job, and she's working on kind of the memoirs of her deceased grandfather, who was her hero. And late in life, he got Alzheimer's and declined and wasn't able to publish his work the way that he wanted. And his protege is publishing a book, and she's feeling that her grandfather's going to get short shrift. So she wants to, in some way, write a memoir or pull all of his journals and notes and research together and put it out there in the world. So she's on this mission to do this for her grandfather. But she meets the guy who lives across the hall, and he is a single dad with 2 little kids, a 2-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old son, who's been a widow for about 2 years. And he's just keeping all the balls in the air. He does graphic design and web design from home. So these are sort of live work studios that they live in, and they meet, and there's instant chemistry, and then they get to know each other as they, deal with their individual wounds and projects in this kind of next door, cross the hall romance situation. So it's been fun to write. I've really enjoyed that. It went very quickly, and I just have to do a little bit of editing to that, and then I'll be releasing it. So if that sounds interesting, sign up to the list, and by May it should definitely be out there and available to anyone who signs up.
Awesome. We'll be sure to have the links for
yeah. So that's been fun. But
yeah, that sounds fun. I like that kind of a story. I have one like that I had started. I haven't revisited it, and I get inspired, I write a couple scenes, and then I put it away until I'm ready to come back and flesh it out.
Yeah. Well, do you plot the whole story? Do you plan, or are you seat of the
Um,
pants writer?
I'm kind of in between. I'm trying to be more of a planner. So I'm studying the story grid and I'm getting my story grid editor certification. So I've been
Mm,
doing that as a way to plot and I'm using it more and more and it just makes the writing part so much easier.
yeah.
I
I think
like
I've always been a planner, so it's
I
natural for me.
I tried to be, but I would end up when I first started planning, I felt like I boxed myself in and I got stuck. So it was like I had too much pressure to do exactly what I planned. So as soon as I gave myself permission to deviate and change the plan, then it got a lot easier.
Yeah.
And then it got to the point where I'd rather plan than write. So I'm trying to find the balance there.
Yeah. Yeah. It takes quite a few different skill sets to put a
Mhm.
novel together. Yeah. Yeah. I think I've always enjoyed uh, plotting a story because, as I say, I like the puzzling part of it. But it does make it challenging sometimes to get through some of those tight spots because you know that this is an important turning point in the story, and you've got to come up with ways to make that happen. Sometimes you know what those are going to be beforehand, and sometimes you don't. So
Mhm.
yeah.
And a story I just wrote for an anthology, I had it all planned out and I thought I was good to go. And then as I was writing it, I realized there were all these things missing that I had
Yeah.
to like fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
So,
Well, the structure helps you recognize
mhm.
those gaps, so that's a good thing. So do you write short fiction as well, or
Yeah,
just novel?
I write short stories for anthologies, although that one ended up being 20,000 words. I think it's 22,000 words. So it was,
Not so much a short story anymore.
yeah, it grew. Um, but I write shorter, most of my stuff is shorter and serialized. I'm working on my first full length novel now. So,
Okay. Yeah, and I come at it from the other direction. I seem to default to overlong stories, complicated ones with secondary characters and plots and twists and turns. And I would love to write short stories, and I have some kind of mental block there. I'm trying to study that a little bit more and figure out. I mean, I think structurally they're the same. There just
mhm.
aren't as many moving parts. Um, but I don't come up with ideas for short stories. So I'm not sure why that is. It's the way my brain's built, I guess.
Yeah, mine are always bigger than like if I try to write a 10,000 word story, it always ends up like this is just the beginning and then there's more to it. But 20,000 words is like my sweet spot.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I think that's a good length, and especially in today's market, I think there's lots of opportunities for that size of book. Yeah, I don't know. What genre are you writing in?
I write in lots of genres. The short story was my first like contemporary romance. Um, and then I mostly write paranormal romance and urban fantasy.
Okay, yeah, it's great. I've read a fair bit of that as well. So, in my reading tastes are a bit more diverse. I mean, I who knows where stories come from or why you write what you write, but I've always been drawn to romance, but also science fiction, which is I don't know. I don't read uh, romantic science fiction, more cyberpunk and steampunk and I don't know geeky techie stuff for some reason. And I actually have written a feature screenplay that's a cyberpunk story that doesn't really have, I mean, it has little bits and pieces of romance, but it's not really a romantic story. And I love that story, but I think I'm going to have to turn it into a novel because it's one of those things. It would cost about $100 million to make it into an actual movie because of all the, I'm exaggerating, but there'd be a lot of CG in it. And so I think, okay, well, I'll make it into a novel and it won't cost anything at all
Hmm.
someday. But it's hard to establish your brand in one genre and then deviate too widely into another. So it's kind of on the back burner for now. That would be it's a gaming. It's a it's about an online game that gets a bit uh, evil. So it's different than my usual subject matter.
That sounds cool though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a hard time not deviating from genre. Like that's why my first deviation was paranormal romance, because I was like, that's pretty close to urban fantasy.
Yeah, it's a
And I
sub
have a fair
hyphen.
amount. Yeah. I have a
It's
fair
just a
amount.
hyphen away.
Exactly. um so that was and then my business partner wanted to do a contemporary romance uh anthology, so I was like, well, I'm gonna do it. And it was hard because usually if I find that something it's too slow or nothing's happening, I can throw a monster at my characters. You can't do that in contemporary romance.
No. Um, yeah, no, I mean, there's romantic suspense,
Hmm.
and I mean, so many subgenres that involve action characters in a way, not monsters and aliens, but the cowboys and the Navy SEALs and the CIA agents and whatever. So I think that's one way. I seem to go in the other direction, where rather than looking outward for uh, antagonists, I look inward. So my characters are dealing with wounds from their past, family trauma, or some kind of identity crisis. And that I think maybe makes for a quieter read, but hopefully one that's more emotionally compelling if it's done well. We're always trying. So, but yeah, sometimes you feel like there's too many talking heads, and you have to throw monsters at them somehow, or random shooters or something. Uh, but it just increases the challenge, for me, I think, to find really meaningful and compelling, true to life reasons why people become their own antagonists in a way. And that's I say that the love interest is sometimes antagonistic on the surface because of personality clashes or conflicting objectives, but in fact they're more often the catalyst that forces the protagonist to look uh, at those parts of themselves that are the demons, that are causing them pain, and shake things up a little bit so that they can move forward. So yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was forced to explore with my contemporary romance, was how something within the characters would drive them apart as opposed to an opposing force.
Hmm. There's a enormous appetite, it seems, for psychological thrillers right now, which
Hmm.
is taking that to a whole nother level, of characters who have evil intent or who have mental health issues that um, bring all sorts of instability into the story. And that's fascinating, but that's not a dark hole that I've ever been compelled to explore, and I don't know why. That actually gives me the heebie-jeebies more than scary aliens.
Yeah.
So yeah, everyone has their own tastes in stories. Yeah,
Yeah, with aliens and monsters, there's a degree of separation,
yeah,
whereas with
yeah.
the psychological suspense and characters who are, similar to somebody in real life, it's a little too real, it's hard
For
to
me,
see. Yeah,
yeah, I
I
find it quite scary.
I have a little bit of a fascination, but they are terrifying. Like I've sometimes I end up scaring myself because I'm like right now I'm reading The Silence of the Lambs, and um reading about Buffalo Bill versus watching the movie is a lot scarier, but it also I keep going back to the fact that he's based off a real serial killer. Like,
Yeah, I know. It makes you want to lock all the doors and stay in, right? Yeah.
yeah.
I have a confession to make. I've never actually seen the movie because I can't. I'm that much of a chicken. I can't watch horror. I don't like psychological. I actually left the theater before Black Swan ended.
Oh, I've
I
never
was
seen
sitting
that
there
one.
crushing the hand of my girlfriend saying, stay, I can't stay, I can't do it. And then we left. She's like, oh, all right. So I don't know. There's a crack in there somewhere. I can't do those stories. uh, Don't know why. Whereas science fiction, in a way, is comforting, I think. I mean, I grew up as a rabid techie, and in the age when all the Star Wars films were first coming out. And I think science fiction um, allows human beings to explore subjects that are too painful or difficult or controversial to actually talk about in real time, in real space. You know, if the other race that you're having conflict with is an alien race, then it's easier to talk about how do we feel about that, and what do we do about that, and how do we right wrongs, or how do we behave in certain situations, you know, and or how do we what are the moral and ethical issues that arise when we encounter another culture in their world, you know, the whole Star Trek premise of not interfering, and other kinds of personal emotional issues that you can explore in a way that's couched in some of the issues around adventures in alien lands. So I think that's one of my favorite sorts of sci-fi is like William Gibson and Neil Stevenson, where you're looking at alternative histories, and looking at the impact of technology on societies, and how that creates conflict, and how people behave in those different kinds of speculative situations. So that's another rabbit hole. I could never write that. I don't think I'm smart enough to write that stuff. It's just there's too much technical stuff to keep track of. It's fascinating, but I would get lost and forget what I said in the last chapter, and drop some balls, I think.
Yeah, that's actually where I like Scribner, because I always have the little notes section up. So if
Yeah,
I create a character like on the spot, I put their name and what their purpose is in the side. So if I'm like, oh, I need to remember that character's name, I can just go look and I don't have to read the whole chapter or scene again.
I love
Because
Scribner.
it's the best.
That's like the best thing that's happened to writers in the last 100 years. And it has so many wonderful features that I actually haven't even begun to explore. You know, it's just, you can only learn a little bit at a time, and then try to incorporate that into your process. But it's almost overwhelming to try to take it all in at once. And actually, Literature and Latte, the people who produce Scribner, have another little app called Scalpel. And do you know it?
I haven't tried it yet.
It's just mind mapping, but I find my brain works better with pictures than with lists. So sometimes if I have a complicated problem to solve, whether that's one story or a series of stories like I was doing recently, or even if it's like the timeline or dual timelines, there are other tools that are specifically calendar oriented, but mind mapping is just loose enough to allow me to connect things and look at the flow, and kind of see a big complicated problem in my brain all at the same time and hold it there. So if I work out a problem in mind map and then I go away, I still have that image in my head. Whereas if I work it out in a chart of some kind, I go away and it's gone. I'm back to chaos and confusion. So, you know, I think you have to find the tools that work for you as a writer, because it is a bit of a complicated problem writing a story. I'm mystified by people that just sit down and start writing start to finish with no plan, and it works out. I don't know how they do that. That's magic.
Yeah, my first book that I tried to write was an epic fantasy novel, and I got 80,000 words in, and it was like, no,
What's going on?
I lost every, like, no, I don't know what's happening. I don't know who the character, like, it was
like literally like Lost. This is
yeah.
like, it just ends. I don't know what happens after that.
Yeah. It was bad. I actually use that story when I'm talking to new writers to be like, plotting is kind of helpful. Because if you put 80,000 words into a project, you want it to go somewhere.
Well, and it's not that you can't find the patterns in it after the fact, but to me that sounds like more work.
Yeah.
Weeding. I already write too many words. I'm a very generous writer, so I always end up in the revision process having more words than are good for the story, and having to figure out which are the ones that need to be there and which of them need to be cut. I would rather be the kind of writer that wrote a lean skeletal story and then could, in a very strategic way, select what's missing and where it needs to be fleshed out. I think, to me, that, I guess because it's the opposite, it would be less confusing that way. But the words just come out the way they come out, so you have to deal with your own manuscripts. So
Right. It is what it is.
yeah, yeah. And with every extra 100,000 words you get down, I think some lessons from the last revision process are internalized. So it's true what they say. Every time, every new manuscript is going to be that much better than the one before. So, and the process, you work your own systems out, and you learn new things. So you take your writing to a new level. I mean, there's very specific, subtle things that I'm dealing with right now that I see in books that I admire, and I sort of know what they're doing, but I can't seem to do it. So I spend a lot of time thinking about, what is that exactly, and why is it having that effect on me, and what are the parts that make that thing up, and how can I make that happen in my own writing? But those little refinements become more more subtle with each stage of your writing. I think it's just, I mean, that's one of the things that's so fascinating about it, is that there's really no end to your own learning process. It gets better and better. Yeah. So
All right. So where can people find you online?
I have a presence on almost every social media platform that's been invented, excluding MySpace. But I'm most active on Instagram. I like pictures, and so I tend to post things there and share it to Facebook and Twitter. Sometimes I'll go into those other ones as well and interact a little bit. But I have a Facebook page. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Goodreads. Mostly that. So yeah. So in terms of just day-to-day chat and writing life and what I ate and where I traveled and that sort of thing, you'll find all of that on Instagram primarily. And then, as I say, I share that to the other platforms. But yep, that's it.
Awesome.
I do occasionally write essays on my website, but I don't blog very often. But if I write something a bit longer, I might post that on Medium as well. So I'm also there. Tumblr, everywhere. Many fingers. Yeah.
Awesome. So it's been great talking to you.
You too. Nice to talk to you today. Good luck with your writing.
Thank you. You too.
Okay. Take care.
You too.